All right, all right. I had posted an article yesterday, and it was following up on the work of Michael Levin, Dr. Michael Levin, however we need to pronunciate that. But his work on like the consciousness of the inner body, like inner cellular consciousness is the context. If you're not familiar with it, go look up Michael Levin. And a friend of mine, Matt Gray, has actually interviewed him, the Cheltenham Philosophers Group on Facebook, I think a couple of times. But really, really cool. And it was kind of important too, because he got through their discussion, Levin had come out sort of in a public way about saying that in his opinion, whatever might be the closest that we could try and model reality would be probably some form of idealism. He was a little vague about it, but he was saying that, he wasn't like condoning per se like analytic idealism or some particular end. He was just saying that somewhere in the range of idealism is going to be about as close as we can get to mapping the extent of reality, to trying to understand ultimate reality from the human or from the finite minded perspective, let's say. Well, of course, most of us agree within this genre. Got some cars coming. It's, the platform here at Hermetic Idealism is, first of all, it has to do with both intellect and intuition, using each according to where it's appropriate to use each. Amir had put another thing out. I'm going to go ahead. Bernardo Kastrup's publicist or manager of the platform, saying that people have been kind of misunderstanding analytic idealism and trying to import mystical things into it, and that's not its purpose. There is mystical idealism, which this Hermetic idealism that I've coined is that it's both though. When we're dealing with things like analytic idealism, we're dealing with one side of the coin, quote, as he put it. It's the intellect. It's trying to make, the whole purpose is to make an intellectual argument that's so intellectual that it could work within things like peer review. And it has a purpose, and that's what it's for. And he's right. That is what it's for, and that is the purpose. I mean, Bernardo has said this, but people haven't caught on to it. He has tried to make that clear. And then you have other kinds of idealism that are more intuitive. And there's lack that rigor, that analytic rigor, that intellectual rigor that accompanies. Well, I'd come along and seen all this business in the idealism world and came up with coined Hermetic Idealism, because I'm like, well, how about those of us who are multidisciplinary thinkers and who actually have had access to direct experience and who have had non-dual experience as an experience, and also deal in terms of the world of intellect and analytic rigor, both all together, not pick one side of the coin and the other, have the whole coin. So I mean, that's the whole point of Hermetic Idealism. Within all of that, there's a few things that sort of pop up, and this is what that article from Michael Levins is saying, that like patterns are living patterns, like the patterns of perceptual reality in a way are alive. And so we could segue that deeper, and then I kind of put in print a way of trying to do that. I want to do it verbally as well. I'm going to double down and do a verbal description. When you're doing it multidisciplinary and you've got access to both sides of the coin, let's say, there's a few things that just become glaringly obvious, and that's that it's a bit of what the intellectual mind in its incremental way of thinking, when it's informed by the holistic mind, the right hemisphere, it changes the way that logic and reason go. Like logic and reason, according to just the left hemisphere, is very narrow compared to where it can go. When it gets expanded out, it becomes a bit of a fool's errand. Okay, crossroads again. A bit of a fool's errand to try and differentiate between what is conscious and what is not conscious, and what has experience and what does not have experience. And you get into some of that in analytic idealism. I mean, and it's for that, it's because it's just analytic, really. So from that perspective, it only allows for so much of an insight. But I don't know, I just pulled some examples of its model and was just kind of saying, well, when you have an idea, a concept of mind at large, and you associate that with like the unified quantum field. Well, when they say that, what they mean is omnipresence. When they say unified quantum field, a non-local field, or an all presence. When that's mind itself, then there's something that it's like to be the omnipresent field. It's an experiential field. And so one thing that's glaringly obvious is that this is in all the groups that I've started, penned a discourse on experiential realism. And Arlindo has a YouTube channel by that name, and we co-admin the Facebook group by that name. Everything starts with experience. There's an eternal level of experience. And you know how Michael's saying, listen, these patterns are like living patterns. Well, guess what? Everything is alive. At some point, you got to get over this left hemisphere only way of thinking that, well, things that metabolize are alive, but then things below the level are not. That only works when you have the one-sided view. When you have the holistic view paired with the other incremented view, it becomes obvious that the basis of reality is eternal life. And what we mean by eternal life is what is meant by the old mystical term spirit, with a capital S. Spirit. Things are spirited. There's animation in things. Now, even what looks like inanimate objects are animated inside. They're full of all kinds of motion and movement. The atoms are not still. The atoms contain motion. The subatomic particles, motion. It's motion. There's something there all the way down. And we could work it all the way down to substratum level, and then we're dealing with omnipresent spirit, which is itself the source. So we would say that is pure awareness, maybe in the mystical traditions. What they would be calling mind at large, or the unified quantum field, or non-local mind. It's everywhere. And it's alive. The only reason that there's the things that we classify as living and alive that do have the metabolism is by extension of this eternal life, which is spirit. Now, our religions have this packed in there, as a concept. They're conceptual, just like science is conceptual. These things are trying to give us concepts that point to beyond all concepts. So we have these concepts of life, and they fall short. So it can be tightened up more, and that's the whole point here. And because people like Michael Levin are starting to see that pattern itself is living, or has to be treated that way, I feel like that's going to catch science up to the things that it has been missing from the spiritual side. And it's understandable that it's been missing those things from the spiritual side, because there's just been an arbitrary divide between the spiritual and the scientific for several hundred years. Well, that door seems to be closing now. I mean, we're getting into a more broad spectrum view now, where you can see that within mind, like where we are in mind, all of this, everything that's happening is in mind. Everything that seems like the world of experience, everything that seems like space and distance between planets, and all, this is all within an omnipresent, holistic, mental substratum. known as mind at large, or Brahman in the Eastern traditions, the all mind and spirit and atom coming off of the Egyptian line into the Hermetic line. We have this stuff everywhere, and now science and philosophy is beginning to catch up to it. And I guess what people need to understand is that the way that science and philosophy are catching up to these insights has to be through that analytic eye. It has to be. I mean, so some people, over the years, I've had other mystics come at me and be like, well, what's wrong with you? You know, this analytic thing, you know, this is not the ultimate reality. Well, yeah, but we know that. We know that it's just a pointer to the ultimate reality, but it's also necessary. So that's the other point. We need this sort of thinking to kind of lead in, per se, lead into what is true. At the end of the day, what's true is eternal life in all faiths, and it's going to turn out to be in all science and all philosophy. Just watch how this unfolds. You know, I'm making the call. This is the direction that science and philosophy, they're catching up to the things that they had been missing, you know, because of these false churches and false narratives that those false churches don't represent spirituality. They represent short-sightedness, parading around a picket sign that says spiritual. You know, I've talked about this. It's kind of pseudo-spiritual, a lot of it. And it caused science and philosophy to kind of make a misturn somewhere and go off, but it's coming back and it's catching up again, and it's figuring out what's what. So life is something that's part of eternal reality. What seems mortal only seems that way. I mean, this is where it's all headed. When you know, and by the time you get down to that understanding, you go, well, you know, isn't that sort of what Christianity was trying to say the whole time? I mean, the original meanings have been nearly lost, but not totally. And those original meanings are going to be coming back as science and philosophy catch up, because it's all going to come together. And when it all comes together into a coherent way, and it all makes sense, and it all adds up, well, then those fallacies will just sort of fall apart, in my opinion. They're just, where do they go? You know, they can only last as long as people are confused about it in the mind. That would be the mental Babylon the Great, the metaphor for this. The finite mind being very confused about its very own existence and thinking that fixed beginnings and fixed endings are a thing when they really can't be. Not in the grand scheme. Reality, non-local reality, is an eternal reality. And life has to be associated to the non-local. And then just perceived through the local. That's just the way this unfolds at depth. There's going to be a lot of people that couldn't even follow this talk, because there's so many mental blockades keeping them from getting there that would have to be unlearned. You know, in the mystical traditions, they'll talk about people having a cup that's overflowing, too full. It can't receive new information, and that's kind of what we're up against here. But I mean, fortunately, in this day and age, it seems like people are becoming more receptive and more open to deeper truths, and maybe setting aside former misconceptions as they're revealed as misconceptions. Life is one of those things. I just think it's very, very silly to try to define life as very small instead of very big. And I couldn't have this argument a couple decades ago. I was trying to have this very argument in the 2000s decade with people on certain websites, and they I don't ever recall it being successful. I don't even remember one case where somebody seemed to get it, and I tried and gave up, and then next decade I'd revisit the same thing to see, you know, maybe if anybody gets it. And no, they didn't seem to. Not on the religious side, not on the people that side with science. because there's just too many dogmas on both of those two sides. The problem is the side taking and not seeing down the middle. I'm talking about it again this decade. We'll see what happens. I mean, right now I've got a better chance of getting through than decades previous. I mean, there are some people that get it now. Before, I think it was like all zero. I mean, at least not the people I was communicating with. And this has been from communicating online, World Wide Web. But I was in kind of intellectual forums with this stuff. But, mixture of spiritual people are in there. But it's just, some people have had a really hard time with just dropping the issue of trying to make life defined in a very narrow, very small manner and not full broad. There's some sort of like prohibition mentally that's keeping people from just seeing it at broad, full spectrum. I would say that the way that the original Buddha teaching and the original Christ teaching was aimed at trying to get people to see it at full broad spectrum, that it is all, that it is omni, it is everything is alive in some way. And that's the whole thing of eternal life. It isn't really, mortality isn't what it appears to be. And that in knowing that, you just have to accept the eternal life that's already there. It's not like something you have to achieve. And the false churches have misconstrued this. They've misconstrued it into a thing where they want to stand between the individual and eternal life, and there's no salvation outside of the church, is the way it's stated. The Catholics have stated that, and then many Protestants have made similar, what are essentially false claims, demonstrably false claims. Reality is non-local. Reality itself is eternal. This non-local, eternal reality is within you, personally, individually. It's in you. All you need to do is open your eyes to what's already there. Now, because I've had direct experience of non-local awareness, I know that it's there because I drifted into it. And I've come back again to the finite experience. I have the experience of a non-local experience and the localized, both to kind of play off of in my own mind, in my own subjective experience. So, I mean, I have that benefit, but not many people do. I mean, how many people actually have gone to... Most of the people that have, like, out-of-body experiences are still in some form of duality, as I've noted. They describe an out-of-body experience, but they're still, like, in an astral body, or they're embodied in some way. In a non-physical way, they're still describing things that come from a point of center looking out. Like, even Bernardo Castro, he took a heroic dose of psilocybin for medical reasons under supervision, and Adrift went into the void, and then wanted to go deeper, went and did a bunch of health checks, and then he talks about this in some past interviews, and wanted to high up the dosage to see what else he could experience. And then he went through this void experience into what he describes as this fractal reality. Well, a fractal, that's different. Fractals, to me, sound like differentiated experiences. This is still short of undifferentiated experience, which is the experience I had. So when I hear others talking about what are considerably out-of-body experiences, very few of them actually go so far as to undifferentiated. When I did it, I wasn't seeing shapes and patterns and fractals and stuff. It was to some sort of pure awareness that was undifferentiated, holistic, and just the way it's described in like Advaita Vedanta. It's not two. There's not two. In order to see fractals, you have to be thinking in terms of two or more. So that's just the depth of it is really deep. So it can, if we just go on testimonies and experience, people talking about their own personal subjective experience, it goes through like layers and layers and layers of differentiated type of experiences that are out to the non-physical, but are still somewhere short of undifferentiated. So I don't know if it's worthwhile to map all that out, but at this point I think I can map it all out. I mean, I have enough data to map it out, just based on, if I just take the witness testimonies of people, of what they've personally experienced, we can come up with a system of layers of differentiated experiences that go way out. And then there's this apex experience, which is undifferentiated, not seen through every eye, not seeing infinite regresses, not seeing fractals, not seeing any of that, not seeing anything at all, because it's completely undifferentiated. Just the experience of fullness, of wholeness is what it is. And to me, that is a taste of this eternal life that we actually are, that's actually within everything. When it says the kingdom of the Father is within you, because a mystic had experienced that, and then it came out as the Buddha mythology, the Christ mythology, and comparable mythologies. So I'm going to leave it there for right now, but that's my take on it. And I am a firm, I'll end on this too. Carl Jung was asked, do you believe in God? And he said, well, that's a tricky question. There's an interview of this, you go find it on YouTube. He goes, I know. It's more than belief. I know. Well, that knowing that Jung points to is a knowing that I've been witness to. So I know it. Whatever I believe and have faith in sort of come in behind the knowing. And that knowing is gnosis. It's what's meant by the term gnosis. You know that you and the Father are one by direct experience. You could know it by intellect and go, well, logically it must be that if I intellectualize this thing. But then that's good. That's great. That's a way ahead of where most people are at. Then there's this further territory, which is the direct experience of being the all, not just intellectualizing it and going, logically, there's no way I can get out of this. The all is everything, and I exist, so I am the all. That's the logical way, and that's good. But once you know it by experience, like you've experienced being holistic instead of individuated, not perceiving from a point of center, looking out, losing that altogether, then you know. And I really think that's what Jung meant when he says, I know God. And then Joseph Campbell, he echoed the same as Jung. He says, it's more than just faith and belief. I know it. I know it too. And so then I understand what they meant by it. And there's probably other people out there who might, synchronize their way into this little video who also know it. And it would be nice to hear from those people as well. All right.